The dust on Tessa Aldridge's feet had turned to a second skin by the time she stumbled into Challis, Idaho on that scorching August morning in 1876, her bare soles bleeding from miles of walking across terrain that showed no mercy to the destitute. She had walked for 3 days straight from the mining camp, where her father had died in a cave in 2 weeks prior, leaving her with nothing but the ragged dress on her back and a hollow ache in her chest that felt like it might never heal. The townspeople stared as she limped down Main Street, their eyes following the trail of crimson footprints she left behind on the wooden boardwalk. But not one of them stepped forward to offer help until she collapsed right there in front of the general store, the world spinning into darkness around her. When Tessa opened her eyes, she found herself staring up at the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face framed by dark hair that fell just past his collar. The man kneeling beside her looked to be in his mid-20s, with strong features and a gentleness in his expression that seemed at odds with the dust-covered work clothes and the gun belt strapped around his narrow hips. He held a canteen to her lips, and she drank greedily, the water tasting like heaven itself after days of rationing from muddy streams. "Easy now," he said, his voice carrying a warm drawl that spoke of somewhere further south. "You drink too fast and you will be sick. Take it slow." Tessa forced herself to slow down, even though every fiber of her being screamed for more water. When she had drunk her fill, she tried to sit up, but the stranger gently pressed her back down. "You are hurt," he said, gesturing to her feet. "Those need tending. My name is Kade Sutherland. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside of town. What is your name, miss?" "Tessa," she managed, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "Tessa Aldridge. I came from the mining camp at Bayhorse. My father, he died in the collapse 2 weeks back. There was nothing left for me there." Kade's expression softened with sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss, but you cannot stay here in the street. Can you walk if I help you? There is a doctor just down the way." Tessa looked down at her feet and felt shame burn through her chest. They were covered in dirt and blood, the soles torn and blistered beyond recognition. "I cannot pay a doctor," she whispered. "I cannot pay for anything. I have nothing." "Then it is a good thing I can," Kade said simply. Before she could protest, he scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Tessa wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but she was so tired and everything hurt so much that she simply let her head rest against his shoulder and allowed herself to be carried. The doctor, an older man named Harrington, clucked his tongue disapprovingly when he saw the state of Tessa's feet. He cleaned and bandaged them with careful precision while Kade waited outside, and when he was done, he looked at her with stern concern. "You need rest, young lady. Those feet will not heal if you keep walking on them. You have a place to stay." Tessa shook her head, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "No, sir. I just arrived in town." Dr. Harrington frowned, clearly troubled, but before he could speak, Kade appeared in the doorway. "If you are willing, miss, I can speak to Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. She sometimes takes on help in exchange for room and board. Nothing too strenuous while you heal." "I can work," Tessa said quickly, desperately. "I am a hard worker. I can cook and clean and mend. My mother taught me before she passed." "Then we will go speak with Mrs. Patterson," Kade said with a decisive nod. He turned to Dr. Harrington. "Put her treatment on my account, Doc." "Now wait just a minute," Tessa protested, trying to stand despite the bandages. "I cannot accept charity from a stranger. I will pay you back every cent, Mr. Sutherland, I promise you that." Kade looked at her steadily, those blue eyes seeming to see right through to her soul. "It is not charity, Miss Aldridge. It is simple human decency. And if it makes you feel better, you can consider it a loan." But right now, you need to rest those feet, and I need to help you get settled before I head back to the ranch. My boss will have my hide if I am gone much longer. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took one look at Tessa's bandaged feet and thin frame, and immediately agreed to take her on, with the understanding that she would help with light housework once she healed. The boarding house was clean and well kept, and the small room Mrs. Patterson showed Tessa to felt like a palace compared to the rough mining camp she had left behind. "You get some rest now, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, patting Tessa's shoulder. "I will bring you up some supper later. And you, Kade Sutherland, you are a good man for helping this poor child." "She is not a child, Mrs. Patterson," Kade said mildly. "She is a grown woman who has been through a terrible ordeal. I am just glad I was in town to help." After Mrs. Patterson left, Kade lingered in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you if that is all right. Make sure you are settling in properly." "You have already done so much," Tessa said, her throat tight with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. You just focus on healing. But Miss Aldridge, before I go, I have to ask, do you have anything at all? Any belongings, any spare clothes?" Tessa felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "This is all I have," she admitted, gesturing to her threadbare dress. "Everything else was lost or sold after my father died." Kade's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes that might have been anger, though she did not think it was directed at her. "I will see what I can do about that. You rest now." He was gone before she could protest again, leaving Tessa alone in her little room with its narrow bed and simple furnishings. She lay back against the pillow and let the tears come at last, crying for her father, for the life she had lost, and for the uncertain future that stretched before her. But somewhere beneath the grief and fear, there was a tiny spark of something else. Hope, perhaps, kindled by the unexpected kindness of a cowboy with blue eyes who had stopped to help when no one else would. True to his word, Kade returned the next morning, his arms laden with packages. He found Tessa sitting in the small parlor downstairs, her feet propped up as Mrs. Patterson had insisted, helping to mend a pile of linens despite her protests that she should be resting. "Miss Aldridge," he said in greeting, setting his packages down on a nearby table. "How are your feet today?" "Better, thank you," Tessa replied, setting aside her mending. "The doctor did good work. Mrs. Patterson has been very kind." "I am glad to hear it." Kade looked almost nervous as he gestured to the packages. "I took the liberty of picking up a few things you might need. Nothing fancy, just practical items. And before you start arguing, remember it is a loan. You can pay me back when you are able." Tessa approached the packages slowly, curiosity warring with pride. When she opened the first one, she found two simple cotton dresses, sturdy and well made but not ostentatious. The second contained undergarments and a nightgown. The third held a shawl and a bonnet. And in the fourth, wrapped carefully in brown paper, was the most beautiful pair of boots she had ever seen. They were women's boots, made of supple brown leather with neat stitching and a modest heel. Not the kind of fancy thing a city lady might wear, but solid, practical boots designed for a working woman who needed to be on her feet all day. Tessa ran her fingers over the leather, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I guessed at the size," Kade said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson at the dry goods store said they could be exchanged if they do not fit. But Miss Aldridge, you cannot keep walking around in bare feet, not in a place like this. The ground is too rough, and winter will be here before you know it." "Mr. Sutherland," Tessa whispered, clutching the boots to her chest. "This is too much. I cannot possibly accept all of this." "You can and you will," he said firmly. Consider it an investment in a fellow human being. You said you would pay me back, and I believe you. But you cannot do that if you cannot work, and you cannot work without proper clothing and footwear. It is simple logic." Tessa looked up at him, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than anyone had in months. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." Kade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My mother and sister found themselves in a similar situation once when I was just a boy. My father had died, and we lost everything. A man in our town helped us when no one else would. He gave my mother work and made sure we had what we needed until we could get back on our feet. He did not do it for thanks or recognition. He did it because it was right. I swore that if I ever had the chance, I would pay that kindness forward. So you see, Miss Aldridge, you are actually helping me keep a promise I made to myself a long time ago." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Tessa's eyes. "Then I thank you, Mr. Sutherland, and I swear to you I will repay every penny." "I know you will," he said with a gentle smile. "Now I should get going. The cattle do not tend themselves, but I will stop by again soon if that is agreeable to you." "It would be very agreeable," Tessa said softly, and was rewarded with a smile that made her heart skip in a way she had never experienced before. Over the following weeks, Tessa settled into life at the boarding house. Her feet healed slowly, and she threw herself into helping Mrs. Patterson with increasing vigor. She cooked and cleaned, took in mending from townspeople who needed extra hands, and gradually began to build a small savings from the wages Mrs. Patterson insisted on paying her despite their arrangement. Kade came to town every few days, always finding an excuse to stop by the boarding house. Sometimes he brought supplies for Mrs. Patterson. Sometimes he came for a meal. Sometimes he simply appeared with a friendly greeting and an invitation for Tessa to take a walk around town, which she gladly accepted once her feet were strong enough. On one such walk in late September, as the aspens on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold against the deep blue sky, Kade finally spoke the words that had been building between them for weeks. "Miss Aldridge, Tessa, I need to be honest with you about something." Tessa's heart clenched with sudden fear. Had she misread his kindness? Was he about to tell her he was married or leaving town, or that he regretted helping her? "I did not stop to help you that day purely out of altruism," Kade continued, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as they walked along the banks of the Salmon River. "I mean, I would have helped regardless, but the truth is, the moment I saw you lying there in the street, something in my chest just seized up. I looked at you, and I thought I have to help her. I have to make sure she is all right. And every day since then, I have found myself thinking about you, wondering how you are, making excuses to come to town just to see your face." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression earnest and vulnerable in a way that made Tessa's breath catch. "I know it has not been long. I know you have been through so much and probably are not thinking about such things. But I need you to know that my feelings for you go beyond simple kindness. I care about you, Tessa, more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time." Tessa felt as if her heart might burst right out of her chest. "Kade," she breathed, using his given name for the first time. "I have been hoping you might say something like that, but I was afraid to believe it could be true. You have been so good to me, and I have nothing to offer you in return." "That is where you are wrong," Kade said, taking a step closer. "You have offered me your company, your conversation, your laughter. You have let me see your strength and your resilience. You have any idea how remarkable you are. You lost everything, and instead of giving up, you kept going. You walked for 3 days on bare feet to find a new life. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court you properly." "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. "Yes, Kade, I would like that very much." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Then, would it be all right if I held your hand while we walk?" In answer, Tessa reached out and laced her fingers through his, feeling the rough calluses on his palm and the warmth of his skin. They walked like that for over an hour, talking about everything and nothing, their words flowing as easily as the river beside them. As autumn deepened into winter, Kade's courtship of Tessa became the talk of Challis. The cowboy and the barefoot girl who had stumbled into town made for a romantic story, and people watched their budding relationship with interest and approval. Tessa continued to work at the boarding house, saving every penny she could, determined to pay Kade back as she had promised. But more than that, she wanted to build something for herself, to never again be as helpless and dependent as she had been that terrible day in August. Kade, for his part, proved to be a patient and attentive suitor. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers in the autumn and carved wooden trinkets as winter set in. He took her to church socials and town dances, teaching her the steps she had never learned growing up in rough mining camps. He told her about his life, about growing up poor in Texas and working his way north, always moving, always searching for something he could not quite name. "I think I was searching for this," he told her one cold December evening as they sat in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, a respectable distance apart as propriety demanded, for a place to belong, for a person to belong to. "I feel the same way," Tessa admitted. "I have been adrift for so long. Even before my father died, we were always moving from camp to camp, following the promise of the next big strike. I have never had a real home." "Then maybe we can build one together," Kade said quietly. "I know it is too soon to speak of such things properly, but Tessa, I want you to know my intentions are serious. When I court a woman, it is because I am thinking of marriage and a future. I would not waste your time or mine on anything less." Tessa felt warmth flood through her chest, despite the winter cold seeping through the windows. "I am glad to hear it, because my intentions are equally serious." That winter was harsh, with snow piling high in the mountain passes and temperatures dropping well below zero on the coldest nights. Kade could not make it to town as often as either of them would have liked, and Tessa worried about him out at the ranch, working long hours in brutal conditions. But he always came when he could, sometimes riding through snowstorms just to spend an hour by her side. It was on one such visit in late January that everything changed. Kade arrived at the boarding house looking tired and wind-burned, but there was an excitement in his eyes that Tessa had never seen before. "I have news," he said, accepting the cup of hot coffee Mrs. Patterson pressed into his hands. "The ranch foreman is retiring come spring. Mr. Holbrook offered me the position." "Kade, that is wonderful," Tessa exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for him. She knew how hard he worked, how much he had proven himself over the years. "It comes with a significant raise in pay," Kade continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "And a cabin on the ranch property. A small place but solid and weatherproof with room to grow." Tessa's heart began to race as she caught the implication in his words. Room to grow. Kade set down his coffee cup and crossed to where she sat, dropping to one knee in front of her chair. Mrs. Patterson gasped from across the room, and Tessa heard footsteps as the other boarders rushed to witness what was happening. "Tessa Aldridge," Kade said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know we have only known each other for 5 months. I know that some might say it is too soon, that we should wait longer. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of this. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and your kind heart. I love the way you laugh and the way you look at the world with hope despite everything you have been through. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a home with you, and if God blesses us, raising a family together. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but genuine diamond set in the center. It was not an ostentatious ring, but it was honest and beautiful, just like the man offering it. Tessa did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Kade, I will marry you." The parlor erupted in applause as Kade slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her to her feet, embracing her properly for the first time. Tessa buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and cold air and the subtle spice of his shaving soap, and felt as if she had finally, truly come home. They were married 6 weeks later on a bright March morning when the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the greening grass and budding willows. The wedding took place in the small church in Challis, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Tessa wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other women had helped her sew. A simple but lovely gown of cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. On her feet were the boots Kade had bought her that first week, polished to a high shine for the occasion. Kade wore his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. And when Tessa walked down the aisle to meet him, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple but moving, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Kade kissed her for the first time, Tessa felt her entire world shift and settle into place. This was where she belonged. This was home. The townspeople threw them a modest reception in the church hall, and Tessa was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and affection. These people, who had been strangers just 7 months ago, had become her community, her friends. When it came time to leave, Tessa sought out Dr. Harrington and pressed an envelope into his hands. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "Payment for treating my feet last August," Tessa said. "It is not everything Kade paid you, but it is half, and I will have the rest to you by summer's end." Dr. Harrington tried to protest, but Tessa was firm. She had made a promise to pay back every penny, and she intended to keep it. The doctor finally accepted with a shake of his head and a warm smile. "You are a remarkable young woman, Mrs. Sutherland," he said. "Kade is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Tessa replied, glancing over to where her husband stood talking with Mr. Holbrook from the ranch. "He saved my life in more ways than one." Kade had borrowed a wagon for the occasion, and they drove out to the Triple Bar Ranch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The cabin that would be their home sat in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwood trees, with a view of the mountains that took Tessa's breath away. It was indeed small, just 3 rooms plus a loft, but it was clean and well built, with a sturdy roof and a good fireplace. "I know it is not much," Kade said as he carried her over the threshold, a tradition he had insisted on despite her laughing protests. "But it is ours, and we can make it into whatever we want." "It is perfect," Tessa assured him, looking around at the simple furniture and the curtains that some of the ranch wives had helped hang as a wedding gift. "Kade, this is more than I ever dreamed of having." Her new husband set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the happy tears that spilled down her cheeks. "You deserve so much more than this, Tessa. You deserve the finest house and the prettiest things. Someday, I promise, I will give you all of that." "I do not need fine things," Tessa said, covering his hands with her own. "I just need you. You and this little cabin and the chance to build a life together. That is more wealth than all the gold in those mining camps could ever buy." Their first kiss as husband and wife in their own home was tender and sweet, and as darkness fell over the Idaho mountains, Tessa reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her here. 7 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, walking on bleeding feet toward an uncertain future. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home to call her own, and a community that had welcomed her with open arms. Life was still hard, the work was still demanding, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But she would face them all with Kade by her side, and that made all the difference. The first year of marriage flew by in a blur of work and discovery and deepening love. Tessa threw herself into making their little cabin a true home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a garden in the spring, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. She also helped with some of the lighter ranch work, tending to the chickens and helping the other wives with various tasks around the property. Kade, in his new role as foreman, worked longer hours than ever, but he always made time for Tessa, always came home with a smile and a kiss and stories about his day. They would sit together in the evenings, Tessa mending or knitting while Kade whittled or tended to tack that needed repair, and talk about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Kade told her one summer evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Mr. Holbrook is getting older, and he has hinted that he might be willing to sell me a partnership in the ranch in a few years if I can come up with the capital. Then we will save for it," Tessa said decisively. "We will put away every penny we can spare and make that dream a reality." True to her word, Tessa became a master at frugality without sacrifice. She made their clothes last longer, grew as much of their food as possible, and even took in sewing work from some of the ranch wives to bring in extra income. By their first anniversary, they had saved a respectable sum, and Tessa had fully repaid both Dr. Harrington and Kade for all the expenses from that first week. When she pressed the final payment into Kade's hands, he looked at the money and then at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You did not have to do this, you know. I never expected it back." "I know," Tessa said, "but I needed to do it. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I was not just some charity case you took pity on." Kade pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were never a charity case, Tessa. You were a gift, the best thing that ever happened to me." Their second spring together brought news that filled Tessa with both joy and terror. She was with child, due to arrive sometime in early winter. Kade was beside himself with excitement, immediately becoming absurdly protective and insisting she rest more and work less. Tessa found his fussing both endearing and exasperating. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she reminded him as he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "I am not made of glass." "I know, but you are carrying precious cargo," Kade said, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child. I cannot help but worry." As Tessa's pregnancy progressed, the other ranch wives rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and reassuring her that everything would be fine. Mrs. Holbrook, the ranch owner's wife, was particularly kind, treating Tessa almost like a daughter and promising to be there for the birth. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in late October and temperatures dropping rapidly. Tessa's due date came and went, and she grew increasingly uncomfortable and anxious as November dragged on. Finally, on a frigid night in early December, her labor began. Kade rode through a snowstorm to fetch Dr. Harrington and Mrs. Holbrook, and for the next 14 hours, Tessa labored to bring their child into the world. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder even than that long walk to Challis with bleeding feet. But when she finally heard the indignant wail of a newborn baby, every moment of pain was forgotten. "It is a boy," Dr. Harrington announced, placing the squalling infant on Tessa's chest. A healthy, strong boy. Tessa looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. Kade appeared at her side, his face wet with tears, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. "What should we name him?" Tessa whispered, exhausted but exhilarated. "I was thinking James," Kade said softly, "after the man who helped my mother all those years ago. James Andrew Sutherland." "It is perfect," Tessa agreed, touching her son's tiny hand and watching in wonder as his fingers curled around hers. "Welcome to the world, James." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and simple joys. James grew into a healthy, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch and helping with chores in his own small way. 2 years after James was born, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, a sweet-tempered baby with her mother's smile and her father's blue eyes. Kade's dream of partnership in the ranch became reality when James was 4 years old. Mr. Holbrook, impressed by Kade's work ethic and business acumen, offered him a 25% stake in the operation, with the option to buy more as finances allowed. It was a significant step up, one that meant more responsibility but also more security for their growing family. They moved into a larger house on the property, one with enough room for their children, and the ones Tessa hoped would come in the future. She made sure to keep her first pair of boots, the ones Kade had bought her that August day so long ago, displayed prominently on a shelf in their bedroom. They were worn and scuffed now, but they represented everything she and Kade had built together, every step of the journey that had brought them to this place. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when livestock was lost and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, worries about the children, and the constant demands of ranch life. But through it all, Tessa and Kade faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, Kade took Tessa back to Challis for a rare night away from the children, who were left in the capable hands of Mrs. Holbrook. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they rarely indulged in, and afterward they walked through town as the summer evening settled into dusk. "You remember the first time we walked together?" Kade asked as they strolled along the banks of the Salmon River, the same route they had taken all those years ago. "Right here, when I told you I wanted to court you." "I remember," Tessa said, leaning into his side. "I was so afraid you were going to tell me something terrible, and instead, you gave me hope for the first time in months." Kade stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I need you to know something, Tessa. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life. You have given me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "You did the same for me," Tessa said, her voice thick with emotion. "Kade, when I collapsed in that street, I thought my life was over. I had nothing and no one, and I could not see a way forward. But you saw me. You stopped when everyone else just walked by. You gave me boots so I could stand on my own 2 feet, and then you gave me your heart. You gave me everything." They kissed there by the river as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Tessa marveled at how far they had come from that desperate August day. She was no longer the barefoot girl with nothing to her name. She was a wife, a mother, a partner in a successful ranch, and a valued member of her community. But more than any of that, she was loved, deeply and truly, by a man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up. The children kept coming, each one a blessing they welcomed with open arms. After Mary came another son, Thomas, and then twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth. Their house was full of noise and laughter, the chaos of a large family, and Tessa would not have had it any other way. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Mary was clever and quick with numbers, often helping Tessa with the household accounts. Thomas had a gentle way with animals that made him invaluable around the livestock. The twins were still young, but they showed signs of inheriting their mother's determination and their father's steady nature. Kade's partnership in the ranch continued to grow, and by the time they had been married 15 years, he owned a full 50% of the operation. Mr. Holbrook, now quite elderly, had come to rely on Kade completely, and there was an unspoken understanding that Kade would eventually inherit the rest. But for all their success, Tessa and Kade never forgot where they came from. They were known throughout the region for their kindness to those in need, often hiring drifters and down on their luck cowboys and giving them a chance to prove themselves. More than once, Tessa took in a woman or child who needed help, remembering all too well what it felt like to be desperate and alone. One late summer day, when Tessa was in town purchasing supplies, she encountered a young woman sitting outside the general store, her feet bare and bleeding, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. The sight hit Tessa like a physical blow, the memories of her own arrival in Challis flooding back with startling clarity. Without hesitation, Tessa approached the woman. "Miss, are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman looked up, her expression wary and hopeless in equal measure. "I walked here from the mining camp at Vienna. There was a fire. I lost everything." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes as she extended her hand. "Then you have come to the right place. My name is Tessa Sutherland. Come with me and we will get you sorted out. First thing, we need to see about those feet, and then we need to get you some boots." The woman, who introduced herself as Anna, stared at Tessa's outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. "I cannot pay," she whispered. "That is all right," Tessa said gently. "Someone helped me once when I had nothing. Now it is my turn to help you. Consider it paying forward a kindness that was shown to me long ago." As Tessa led Anna toward Dr. Harrington's office, she caught sight of Kade across the street, loading supplies into their wagon. Their eyes met, and he smiled, that same warm, loving smile that never failed to make her heart skip. He understood immediately what was happening, and his approving nod told her he was proud of her for carrying on the tradition of kindness they both valued so deeply. That evening, after they had gotten, Anna settled with Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house and purchased her a pair of boots and some basic supplies. Tessa and Kade sat together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. "You did good today," Kade said, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together just as they had on that first walk so many years ago. "I just did what you taught me," Tessa replied, "what you showed me through your actions. That we are called to help each other, to lift each other up when we fall." "We make a good team," Kade said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The best team," Tessa agreed, resting her head on his shoulder and feeling contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. The children grew, each finding their own path in life. James eventually took over the ranch alongside his father, proving himself as capable and fair-minded as Kade had been. Mary married a schoolteacher and moved to Salmon, the larger town to the north, where she helped run a boarding school for children from the mining camps. Thomas became a veterinarian, studying in Boise before returning to Challis to set up a practice. The twins both found love with local ranchers' sons, staying close to home and starting families of their own. Through it all, Tessa and Kade remained the center around which their family orbited. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines that spoke of years of laughter and occasional tears. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The whole community turned out to celebrate, filling the house and spilling out into the yard. There were grandchildren running everywhere, and Tessa lost count of how many times she was hugged and kissed and congratulated. When the party was winding down and most of the guests had gone home, James stood up to make a toast. "I want to say something about my parents," he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Growing up, I heard the story of how they met more times than I can count. How Ma walked into Challis with nothing, not even shoes on her feet. How Pa stopped to help when no one else would. How he bought her boots and, eventually, a wedding ring." He paused, his eyes moving between his parents. But the real story is not about boots or rings or even about how they fell in love, although that is a beautiful part of it. The real story is about what they built together. About how they took nothing and made it into everything. About how they raised us to be kind and fair and hardworking. About how they have helped dozens of people over the years, expecting nothing in return. Ma and Pa, you have shown all of us what it means to build a life of meaning and purpose. You have shown us what real love looks like, and we are all better people for having you as our parents. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Tessa found herself crying openly, not caring who saw. Kade wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, and she could feel that he was equally moved. Later, when everyone had finally gone and they were alone in their room, Tessa went to the shelf where she kept her first pair of boots. She took them down and held them, running her fingers over the worn leather. "I cannot believe I have had these for 30 years, she mused. "They are falling apart, but I can never bring myself to throw them away." Kade came to stand beside her, looking at the boots with a soft smile. "They are a part of our story, the beginning of everything we built together." "Do you ever regret it?" Tessa asked, turning to face him. "Stopping to help that day, taking on a penniless girl with nothing to offer." Kade cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with all the love and tenderness he had shown her for 3 decades. "Tessa Sutherland, you are the best decision I ever made. The only thing I regret is all the years we did not have together before that day. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have given me love and family and purpose. You took the boots and the ring I offered, and you gave me the whole world in return." They kissed then, slow and sweet, and Tessa felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt at 18 when this man had first told her he wanted to court her. Some things, she reflected, never changed. Some loves only grew stronger with time. As they settled into bed that night, Tessa thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain and loss that had led her to Challis. The desperation that had driven her to walk for 3 days on bare feet. The moment of collapse that had seemed like the end of everything, but had actually been the beginning. She thought about Kade's kindness, his patience, his unwavering belief in her worth even when she had nothing material to offer. She thought about the life they had built, the children they had raised, the love they had nurtured through good times and hard times. "Kade," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, love, thank you for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for helping me when I was helpless, for loving me when I was unlovable. You were never unlovable, Tessa. You were always extraordinary. I was just lucky enough to recognize it." Tessa smiled and snuggled closer to her husband, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, she would simply rest in the certainty of being loved, of being home, of being exactly where she belonged. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Tessa and Kade continued to thrive. They became grandparents many times over, their house often filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and learning and growing. They watched as Challis grew from a small frontier town into a more established community, with better roads and more amenities, though it never lost its close-knit character. Tessa became something of a legend in the area, known not just as Kade Sutherland's wife, but as a force in her own right. She was the woman people came to when they needed advice or help, or simply a sympathetic ear. She continued her practice of helping those in need, particularly women who found themselves in desperate circumstances, as she once had. Over the years, she helped dozens of people find their footing, offering practical assistance and emotional support in equal measure. The ranch prospered under Kade and James's joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. But success never changed Kade's fundamental nature. He remained the same kind, hard-working man who had stopped to help a barefoot girl in the street, and he raised his sons and grandsons to follow his example. When Tessa was 58 years old, she and Kade made a trip to Boise, the territorial capital, to visit Thomas and his family. While they were there, they attended a lecture on women's suffrage, a topic that had been gaining momentum throughout the West. Tessa found herself deeply moved by the speaker's words about the worth and dignity of all people, regardless of gender or circumstance. "You know," she said to Kade as they rode the train back to Challis, "if someone had told that frightened girl who walked into town with no shoes that she would someday sit in a fancy hall listening to talk about women's rights, she never would have believed it." "That girl became a remarkable woman," Kade said, taking her hand. "A woman who has shown everyone around her what strength and grace look like. I'm not surprised you are interested in these ideas. You have been living them your whole life." As they grew older, Tessa and Kade began to slow down, as was natural. They turned over more of the ranch operations to James and his sons, spending more time simply enjoying each other's company and the family they had created. They took walks together every evening when weather permitted, often ending up by the river, where Kade had first declared his intentions all those years ago. On one such walk, when Tessa was 62 and Kade was 65, they sat on a bench that James had built for them at their favorite spot, watching the water flow by in the golden light of late afternoon. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not come to Challis that day?" Kade asked. "If you had stopped at some other town, or if someone else had helped you first?" Tessa considered the question seriously. "I think I would have survived somehow. I was determined to make a life for myself, one way or another. But I cannot imagine it would have been anywhere near as happy. You gave me more than just help, Kade. You gave me a partnership. You treated me as an equal from the very beginning, even when I had nothing and you had every reason to see me as beneath you. That is the real gift you gave me, I think. Not the boots or the dress or the ring, precious as those were. You gave me the gift of being seen and valued for who I was, not what I had." "Well, who you were was pretty remarkable," Kade said with a smile. "Is pretty remarkable. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa, and I mean that with my whole heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the world go by. Tessa thought about all the moments that had led to this one, all the choices and chances and bits of providence that had woven together to create their life. She thought about her father, who she still missed despite the decades that had passed. She thought about her mother, who she barely remembered but whose lessons had stayed with her. She thought about the hard years of moving from camp to camp, and the terrible day when everything had fallen apart. And then she thought about the rebuilding, about Cade's kindness and the town's welcome, about learning to cook on a temperamental stove and plant a garden in rocky soil, about the births of her children and the joy of watching them grow, about becoming a grandmother and then a great-grandmother, about building a legacy that went far beyond material wealth. "I am grateful," she said finally, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here, to you, to our family, to this life we have built." "I am grateful too," Cade said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Every single day. They remained vital and active well into their later years, defying the expectations of those who thought they should simply retire and rest. Tessa continued her work helping others, and Cade remained involved in the ranch even as he let the younger generation take the lead. They were fixtures in the community, respected and loved by all who knew them. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered once again, this time in a much larger celebration that included not just their children and grandchildren but great-grandchildren as well. The party spilled out across the entire ranch, with tables of food and music and laughter echoing across the valley. Tessa, now 68 but still sharp-minded and clear-eyed, stood with Cade to greet their guests. She wore a beautiful dress that Mary had made for her, and on her feet were a pair of good boots, practical and well-made. But in a place of honor in their home, visible to all who entered, sat those first boots, the ones Cade had bought her 40 years ago. Many of the guests asked about them, and Tessa never tired of telling the story, about walking into Challis with bleeding feet and nothing to her name, about a kind cowboy who stopped when no one else would, about boots that represented so much more than footwear, and a wedding ring that symbolized a love that had lasted 4 decades and counting. "The thing people do not always understand," Tessa told a group of her grandchildren later that evening, "is that your grandfather did not just save me that day. He gave me the tools and the support to save myself. The boots let me work. The clothes let me face the world with dignity. The faith he showed in me gave me the confidence to believe I could build a new life. And then, when I had proven to myself that I could stand on my own, he offered me partnership, not just rescue. That is what real love looks like. Not someone swooping in to fix all your problems, but someone standing beside you and helping you find the strength to fix them yourself." The grandchildren listened with rapt attention, several of them wiping away tears. They had heard versions of this story their whole lives, but hearing it from Tessa herself, with 4 decades of lived experience behind the words, gave it new weight and meaning. As the years continued to pass, Tessa and Cade's love story became woven into the fabric of Challis's history. They were the couple people pointed to when they wanted to show what a good marriage looked like, what real partnership meant. New brides and grooms sought their advice, and they always gave it willingly, sharing the wisdom they had accumulated over decades together. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and eventually his oldest son, another Cade named for his grandfather, began taking on more responsibility. Young Cade had inherited his grandfather's quiet kindness and his grandmother's fierce determination, and everyone agreed he would lead the ranch well when his time came. Tessa and Cade Sr. settled into a gentle old age, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They spent their days in quiet contentment, surrounded by family and friends, taking joy in simple pleasures. Every morning, Cade made Tessa coffee just the way she liked it. Every evening, Tessa would read to Cade from whatever book had caught her interest. And every day, multiple times a day, they told each other they loved one another. When Tessa was 75 and Cade was 78, they took one more trip to Boise, this time to see Idaho officially become a state. It was July 3, 1890, and the celebrations were grand. Tessa and Kade stood in the crowd with their children and grandchildren, watching history unfold before their eyes. "We have seen so much change," Tessa marveled as they rode the train back home. "When I first came to Challis, Idaho was still a territory. The whole West was still so wild and unsettled. Now look at us. We have railroads and telephones and electric lights in some places. It is remarkable. The world changes, but some things stay the same," Kade said, squeezing her hand. "Love, family, the importance of being kind to your fellow man. Those things do not change with time or technology." "You are right," Tessa agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Those are the things that really matter." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1896, surrounded by what seemed like half of Idaho. 5 children, 23 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren filled the ranch house to bursting, along with friends and neighbors who had known them for decades. It was a joyous occasion, marked by laughter and tears and countless stories about the couple who had built such an incredible life together. Tessa, now 73, still moved with purpose and energy, though her steps were slower than they once had been. Kade, 76, walked with a cane, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and his eyes still lit up every time he looked at his wife. During the party, James stood to make another toast, this one even more moving than the one he had given 20 years earlier. "I have been thinking about how to properly honor my parents on this remarkable occasion," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. 50 years of marriage is an incredible achievement, but when I think about Ma and Pa, I do not just think about the length of their marriage. I think about the depth of it, the richness of it, the way they have loved each other through good times and bad, through plenty and want, through joy and sorrow." He paused, clearly emotional. "I think about the story of how they met, and how Pa saw Ma not as a burden or a charity case, but as a person worthy of dignity and respect. I think about how he gave her boots so she could walk with her head held high, and how he eventually gave her a wedding ring as a symbol of his commitment. But more importantly, I think about how Ma took those gifts and built an empire of kindness, about how she has spent 50 years helping others the way Pa helped her, about how together they have created a legacy that goes far beyond this ranch or our family. They have shown an entire community what it means to live with integrity and compassion." He raised his glass. "To Ma and Pa, may we all be fortunate enough to find a love like yours and wise enough to cherish it if we do." The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Tessa found herself once again weeping openly, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. Kade held her close, and she could feel his own tears dampening her hair. Later that night, after all the guests had gone and they were alone in their room, Tessa brought out the boots one more time. They were in terrible shape now, the leather cracked and worn, the soles completely through in places, but they were still precious beyond measure. 50 years, she marveled, holding them gently. 50 years since you bought these for me. 50 years since you gave me a chance at a new life. Best money I ever spent, Kade said, coming to stand beside her. Though I confess, when I bought them, I had no idea I was also buying myself a lifetime of happiness. Tessa set the boots down carefully and turned to embrace her husband. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "I love you, Kade Sutherland," Tessa whispered. "I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too, Tessa Sutherland," Kade replied. "You are my heart, my home, my everything." They continued on for several more years, each day a gift they treasured. They watched more grandchildren marry and more great-grandchildren be born. They saw the ranch continue to thrive and the community continue to grow. They took joy in small moments and big occasions alike, never taking for granted the life they had built together. On a warm summer evening in 1898, when Tessa was 75 and Kade was 78, they took their usual walk down to the river. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the mountains stood eternal in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. They sat on their bench, the one that had been repaired and refinished multiple times over the years, but remained their favorite spot in the whole world. They held hands and watched the river flow, talking quietly about everything and nothing. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we sat here?" Kade asked. "When I told you I wanted to court you." "I said yes before you could finish the sentence," Tessa recalled with a laugh. "I had been hoping you would ask, but I was afraid to believe it could really happen." "I knew that very day that I would marry you if you would have me," Kade confessed. "I knew you were the one I had been searching for all those years of wandering. You were my home, Tessa. You still are." "And you are mine," Tessa said, squeezing his hand. "You always will be." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the world in shades of amber and purple. Tessa felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a deep contentment that came from a life well lived and love well shared. The years continued to pass, and eventually, as is the way of all mortal things, Kade's health began to decline. He faced it with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life, never complaining, always grateful for each day he was given. Tessa remained by his side through it all, just as he had remained by hers through every challenge they had faced together. On a cold January morning in 1901, with his children and grandchildren gathered around and Tessa holding his hand, Kade Sutherland peacefully passed away at the age of 81. His last words were for his wife. "Thank you," he whispered, his blue eyes, dimmed with age but still warm with love, fixed on her face. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for the best life a man could ask for." "Thank you for stopping," Tessa replied through her tears. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me so well." Kade smiled, squeezed her hand one last time and closed his eyes for the final time. The grief of losing him was profound, a pain that Tessa felt in her very bones, but she did not let it destroy her. Instead, she did what Kade would have wanted. She kept living, kept loving, kept helping others. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, determined to honor his memory by continuing the legacy of kindness they had built together. Tessa lived for another 7 years after Kade's death, remaining active and engaged with her family and community until the very end. She saw Idaho continue to grow and change, saw her grandchildren have children of their own, saw the ranch prosper under the capable management of James and young Kade. And every day, she would spend a few moments with those old boots, running her fingers over the worn leather and remembering the young cowboy who had bought them for a barefoot girl with nothing to her name. She would remember the love they had built, the life they had created, and she would smile through her tears. On a spring morning in 1908, with the cottonwoods budding and the mountains green with new growth, Tessa Sutherland passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. She was surrounded by family, her room filled with flowers and love, the old boots sitting on the shelf where they had been for more than 50 years. At her funeral, which was attended by what seemed like the entire county, James spoke once more about his parents' love story. He held up the boots, carefully preserved despite their age and wear, and told the gathered crowd about their significance. "These boots represent the beginning of a love story that spanned more than 5 decades, he said, his voice thick with emotion. They represent my father's kindness and my mother's determination. They represent the values that both of them lived by and tried to pass on to all of us. Kindness, compassion, the importance of helping those in need. The belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. Ma always said that Pa gave her boots so she could stand on her own 2 feet, and she did. She stood strong for 85 years, building a life of meaning and purpose, raising a family, helping countless people, and showing all of us what it means to live with integrity. She and Pa built something beautiful together, and that beauty continues in all of us who were fortunate enough to know and love them. The boots were placed in a special display case at the ranch, along with Tessa's wedding ring and various other mementos from their life together. Generations of their descendants would come to see them, to hear the story of the barefoot girl and the kind cowboy, and to understand the foundation upon which their family was built. The ranch continued to prosper for many years, remaining in the family and growing with each generation. The little cabin where Kade and Tessa had started their married life was preserved as a historic site, and people would come from all over to see where such a great love story had begun. In Challis, a small park was established in Tessa and Kade's honor, with a bronze statue of a cowboy helping a woman to her feet, and beneath it, a plaque that read, "In memory of Kade and Tessa Sutherland, who showed us all what it means to build a life of love and service. May their example inspire us to help those in need and to cherish the bonds of family and community." The story of their love became legend in Idaho and beyond, told and retold to children and grandchildren, always with the same message at its heart: that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come from the simplest acts of human decency. Years turned into decades, and the world continued to change in ways that Tessa and Kade never could have imagined. Cars replaced horses. Electricity became commonplace. Women gained the right to vote, something Tessa had championed in her later years. The ranch modernized, adopting new technologies and methods while still holding fast to the values its founders had established. But through all the changes, the story remained. Every few years, some journalist or historian would come to Challis to write about the Sutherlands, fascinated by their tale and the legacy they had left behind. The boots became famous, written about in books and newspapers, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Descendants of Tessa and Kade spread across Idaho and beyond, carrying with them the values they had inherited and the stories they had heard. Many of them followed in their ancestors' footsteps, becoming ranchers and community leaders. Others went in different directions, becoming teachers and doctors and business people. But all of them carried the legacy of those boots and that wedding ring, of kindness given freely and love built to last. The ranch itself remained a Sutherland property well into the 21st century, managed by the 6th generation of Tessa and Kade's descendants. They maintained the museum dedicated to their famous ancestors, welcoming visitors who came to learn about the remarkable couple who had started it all. On the wall of the museum, alongside the famous boots and other artifacts, hung a large portrait of Tessa and Kade, painted when they were in their 60s. In the picture, they stood together in front of their house, Kade's arm around Tessa's shoulders, both of them smiling with the quiet contentment of a life well lived. Visitors often remarked on how happy they looked, how clearly the love between them shone through even in a simple portrait. And below the portrait, in a carefully preserved frame, hung the words Tessa had written in her journal on their 50th wedding anniversary. words that summed up everything their life together had meant. 50 years ago today, I married the man who saved my life by giving me the tools to save myself. He gave me boots so I could walk with dignity. He gave me a wedding ring as a symbol of his love. But more than that, he gave me partnership, respect, and a love that has sustained me through every joy and sorrow these 50 years have brought. I was too poor to afford shoes when we met, but I became rich beyond measure through his love and the life we built together. May our story remind others that kindness is never wasted. Love is the greatest treasure, and from the humblest beginnings, the most beautiful lives can grow. Those words, more than anything else, captured the essence of Tessa and Kade's story. It was not just a tale of a poor girl and a kind cowboy, though it was certainly that. It was not just a love story, though it was one of the greatest love stories the region had ever known. It was a testament to the power of human kindness, to the strength of partnership, and to the beautiful truth that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change not just one life, but generations to come. And so the story lived on, passed down through the years, inspiring new generations to stop and help when they saw someone in need, to treat everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances, and to believe in the transformative power of love. The boots sat in their case, worn and weathered but precious beyond measure, a tangible reminder of where it all began. From time to time, visitors to the museum would ask if the story was really true, if one man's simple act of buying boots for a desperate woman could really have led to such a remarkable legacy. The Sutherland descendants would always smile and point to the boots, to the wedding ring beside them, to the countless photographs of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried Tessa and Kade's legacy forward into the world. It is all true, they would say, every word of it. Because love like that, real love built on kindness and respect and partnership, that kind of love does not just last a lifetime. It echoes through the generations, touching lives far beyond what the original lovers could ever have imagined. That is the real magic of their story. Not just that they found each other, but that they built something that continues to inspire and uplift people more than a century later. And indeed, the story did continue to inspire. Young couples would visit the museum before their own weddings, seeking some of the magic that had made Tessa and Kade's marriage last 53 years. People facing hard times would come to see the boots, reminding themselves that from the most desperate circumstances, beautiful new beginnings could emerge. Parents would bring their children, wanting them to understand the values of kindness and compassion that Tessa and Kade had embodied. The legacy lived on in concrete ways too. The Sutherland family established a foundation that provided assistance to people in need, with a special focus on helping women and children escape difficult situations and build new lives. Every year, the foundation helped hundreds of people, giving them the modern equivalent of boots and new clothes and a fresh start, just as Kade had done for Tessa all those years ago. The ranch itself employed dozens of people and contributed significantly to the local economy. But more than that, it remained a place where people were valued, where hard work was respected, and where kindness was not just preached but practiced. Employees in need were helped, community members facing hardship were supported, and the values Tessa and Kade had established remained the foundation of how business was conducted. In Challis itself, Tessa and Kade's influence could be seen everywhere. The library they had helped fund in their later years, the school that bore their name, the annual community day that celebrated their anniversary and raised money for local charities. They had become woven into the very fabric of the town. their story as much a part of Challis's identity as the Salmon River or the mountains themselves. And through it all, the boots remained, a simple pair of women's boots that had cost a few dollars in 1876, but had become priceless with time. They represented so much more than footwear. They represented hope and new beginnings. They represented kindness and compassion. They represented a love that had lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that continued to inspire and uplift everyone who heard its story. For Tessa had been too poor to afford shoes when she stumbled into Challis on that long-ago August day. But a cowboy named Kade had bought her boots and eventually a wedding ring, and together they had built something that money could never buy. A life of love and meaning, a family bound by strong values, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. That was the real treasure, the real wealth that had come from such humble beginnings. And somewhere, in whatever place good souls go when they leave this earth, Tessa and Kade walked together still, hand in hand, their love as strong and true as it had been on that first walk by the river when a young cowboy had told a barefoot girl that he wanted to court her, and she had said yes, and their beautiful story had truly begun.